The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
This has been fucking shit, this campaign so far, but it has sprung into life in the last couple of days. The Greens are flying out records, flicking through the vinyls, going like, the cost of living crisis is that, how is a family of four going to afford a triple gatefold best of pavement vinyl set in this economy? It is getting harder and harder to put a 40 years of flying nun coffee table book in the homes of regular New Zealanders.
Tēnā koutou katoa. This is gone by lunchtime. It's 1 month till polling day. 1 month until you nestle yourself into that cardboard manufactured booth and put two ticks, little circles of democracy. Are you guys, kia ora, Annabelle, Lee Mather, kia ora, Ben Thomas. You guys vote on the day, voters? Do you feel that's quite a sacrosanct thing?
No,
You're advance voting.
I've intended to do that the last two elections when they've really been pushing advanced voting as an option, and I can't contain myself. I just love democracy too much.
So you do it on the first day of advance voting?
Not the first day. I try and hold out, but then usually I break. So I think somewhere in the second week.
I love democracy so much that I feel I have to do it on polling day. Annabelle,
it's got to be on polling day.
Get a little sticker,
otherwise, it's like opening your Christmas presents before Christmas. But just to be a real dick, I also take my children with me because the research shows that if you come from a whānau where your parents don't vote, that you're probably not going to vote either. So we take our kids along in the hope that instead of repelling them, that it actually makes them feel comfortable going to vote. Once
again, this podcast strays dangerously into the territory of parenting advice.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is the dogs at polling booths are like that. We're going to go really hard on that this year on the website.
Nice.
Just hundreds and maybe thousands of dogs, pictures of dogs at polling booths, send them to us. Not to me personally, but to info@thespinoff.co.nz. And we're just going to put them on the website. We're just going to have an absolute festival of dogs at polling booths. Can I say one more thing just before we get into it? Policy.nz is back. It's so great. I genuinely love this project that the team put together where you can compare policies, you can compare candidates as well. It's none of this kind of weird juju make-up, put yourself on a matrix nonsense. It's a very useful way of comparing policies, and I urge you all to look at it. Thank you, Sam, for producing today. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about... I did write down what we're going to talk about. Oh, the energy in the campaigns. Slightly greater than the energy in this podcast so far. Maybe the debates a bit, the Prefu, a bit about the Prefu, and the breaking news about Winston Peters on indigeneity.
Revelations,
It's quite interesting. We'll come to that. Let's first talk though about the polls. 2 TV polls in the last few days. And they're really bad for Labour and Chris Hipkins because you actually literally start seeing people talking about landlines on Twitter. It's an absolute tell.
And Chris Hipkins last week, the man who's been Prime Minister for 9 months, said Well, the campaign's only just started, and I think people have got to get to know me.
Saying that on every day. Soon the campaign will start, he says, on October the 13th. Annabelle, Chris Hipkins also said, after the polls, he said, I accept responsibility, and he said, there is a mood for change. And I swear when I heard that, I thought, have I woken up on October the 15th? These are the words of concession speech almost. But he says, actually, I can be the change. I am the change that the moment calls for, which seems quite a stretch. Is there a chance that are we in saving the furniture mode now?
What do you mean by saving the furniture mode?
Well, it's like, whose the line was that? It was about Mike Moore, the idea, I think, that coming in to lead the Labour Party, and it wasn't a matter of trying to win. It was a question of trying to keep what you can keep. So, like, trying to mitigate damage.
But what do you mean by that? Like, are we talking about we're trying to save X amount of people on the list, or we're trying to save these policies from getting binned?
Trying to avoid a catastrophe, I guess.
Yeah. Because there are knock-on effects to a devastating loss, and the first one is that you don't get any new MPs unless you've constructed your list very deliberately. Labour hasn't. Labour have constructed their list in a way that they are likely to lose a lot of ministers if they, in the case of a bad result or on the current polling. And so if you start losing both, experienced people will retire depending on how dire it is. So if you don't get people in who've got experience, you basically have a bunch of electorate MPs who were either not slated for great things or, sort of never were's or, kind of has-beens. And they have very few resources in Parliament because the number of MPs you have determines how much funding you get from parliamentary services, how many staff you can hire, and so it can really have a knock-on effect into the next 3 years. Say the difference between 25% and 30%, even though both mean that you're roundly out of power. So I think you're right in terms of the policies, in terms of saving, say, fairer pay agreements. Saving the furniture, I think, is down to that level of literally just kind of making sure that you've got somebody who remembers how to run a caucus meeting or something. Yeah,
I don't think Labour are looking to lose well. I think it's important we remember that politicians have Teflon-coated egos, and it's amazing the level of self-belief they have that there's a chance that they could win. So I do think
it's a necessary trick you play on yourself. Yeah.
I do think that Hipkins thinks that they have a chance to take it out. And to be fair, when you look at the number of undecided voters in a lot of these polls, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that the left could form a government. I think what the polling shows, though, and, those of you who know me will know that I'm really sick of polls and I think they're overused, is that polls have this effect of like slowly and all at once in terms of things like a mood for change. And I feel like the more polling that's done, the quicker the mood changes. We've seen like a slow erosion of Labour's support, but actually held up pretty well considering the amount of drama and scandals that they've endured. And then over the last weeks, it's like slipped really suddenly, but that slip also coincides with the amount of polling that's being done, where we're looking at kind of 2-3 polls a week. So I think that, again, it's a sign of the level of influence that just polling itself can have in an election.
It certainly does look like, they just fell off a cliff about sort of 3 or 4 weeks ago. All of the polls taken in the last 3 weeks, I think every poll except Talbot Mills has shown Labour in the 20s, and Talbot Mills has had them at 30. So it was, like you said, quite sudden. And then you have people throwing around words like death spiral, which is certainly meant to be, a reflection of that kind of self-fulfilling nature. It is interesting because it does seem on most of the polls that there's that the centre-right bloc, ACT and National, have got an advantage. Now the real wrinkle or the real, I guess, point of interest is, does New Zealand First get over 5%? And more than that, does it get over 5% by taking votes from National or ACT? Because they've been over 5%, I think, again, in most of the polls.
And 2 of the 3 that we've seen this week. I think.
2 of the 3 this week, but I think there's only about 1 poll left where I think the Taxpayers Union, they've been over the 5% as well, and then they slipped back. So there are a number of polls that have shown them over 5%, but only 2 of them, and I think it's only the Guardian ones, have shown them as holding the balance of power.
Yeah.
So this is my understanding from national strategists, is that they're quite confident that so far the support is just coming off Labour to New Zealand First. Now, if that trend continues, I think National and ACT will be pretty happy with that. They'd probably prefer not to have New Zealand First in Parliament because, of course, they get more of a benefit from a wasted vote than Labour does. On the other hand, as long as it doesn't endanger their ability to create a majority, it's sort of you can live with it.
But look, if New Zealand First get over the 5%, then it changes the calculus in terms of, if they get 4.9, then that vote is, I know this is not literally true, but in practice, really, that vote is shared out.
That's right. And so National gets 3 of those.
That's like, it's worth 3 or 4 seats, and it could be the difference between 65 seats and 61 seats.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
61 out of 120 doesn't really fill you with confidence when, we don't know what happened. We've seen, it always happens, the Gaurav Sharma type situations, those sorts of things. And so it does add some stability risk to a government.
Yeah, ACT have been doing a very accelerated evolutionary survival of the fittest process on their list.
Losing five candidates
in about a month, which, obviously never great news for a campaign. On the other hand, better now than in a month's time, I suppose. So, it's really, I think, this certainly won't be thanking them now, but, David Seymour might be thanking the news media sort of after the election for the work they've done, sort of uncovering some of the cranks on that list.
It could be an interesting situation if that's how the cards fall, where it's 61 to the right bloc, because then what happens, they've all ruled out working with Te Pāti Māori. So who do they sidle up next to create a government that is going to be stable enough to survive the Gaurav Sharmas and those sorts of situations? Could we end up with a hung parliament?
Could do. Or maybe in that situation, Winston Peters would be vindicated once again in introducing the waka jumping legislation, because those who, no defectors, well, seriously, right? You can see this. Anyway. Hey, back to the campaign trail. Christopher Luxon. I don't know about you guys, but I'm watching the campaign trail part of it, the shaking hands, the small talk, the dressing up as a pirate. He's been smashing it. He's been astonishingly good at that, I think. Because, I couldn't do that. It's not a natural thing, and it's the first time that I've really seen when people have said over the years, he's got a lot of John Key in him. He's a natural. He's beaming. Obviously the poll numbers are going quite well, so there is a sense of a self-fulfilling prophecy coming in there. On the other hand, there's the interviews, the media stand-ups, the Q&A on Sunday, which was a lot of Q and almost no A on the part of Luxon. Just doesn't answer questions that he finds difficult. And then again the stand-ups this week in relation to the foreign buyer property tax and whether it have effect on the housing market. He was asked by that by NewsHub yesterday. And then the bigger one on the revenue it's going to pull in. Is that pressure mounting, do you reckon, Annabelle? I think there's a confidence often in these sorts of things from strategists that it feels all blurry and people are talking about numbers. This morning, though, we had 3 economists from across the spectrum, Sam Warburton, CoreLogic's Nick Goodall and Michael Riddell, who's formerly of the Reserve Bank and certainly not a Labour Party stooge, coming out with these numbers saying there's I think 2 billion missing across 4 years, $500 million a year, and trying to crunch these numbers.
They said if you really stretch it, you can probably get to about 25% of what National's banking on.
Right. And so do you? I guess the question in a way is, does that spill through into the public consciousness at some point?
Well, because we're in the early days of the campaign, we are in baby kissing mode and that, which makes Luxon look good because he's doing well in the polls and that makes you feel swaggy and great and wonderful. But like you say, where he comes unstuck is when he comes under hard questioning. And in the next few weeks, as all of the leaders' debates kick off across the various platforms, I think we're really going to see his vulnerabilities in terms of his lack of experience in politics. He doesn't have the agility to answer questions convincingly at the moment, and I think it is going to be trouble for him in the next few weeks because I think the good mood, the vibes can only carry you so far, particularly as people do feel the stress of the cost of living. And there does seem to be a bit of a pattern with him and Willis of magical thinking in terms of some of their their finance and economics and those types of issues where, we were talking about controlling inflation just through the power of our minds and those sorts of things. So I think that all of Labour's hopes are going to be carried by Hipkins being able to outperform him in those leadership debates. How many swing voters watch them? That's another question because, there may not be enough of a critical mass of swing voters or undecided voters who actually tune in and have that impact the way they vote.
Yeah, Richard Preble was in the Herald this week saying that they could be decisive, which was interesting.
Everyone's trying to jostle for underdog status in advance. So yesterday, Luxon said... He said, look, Chris Hipkins is a champion debater.
The best debater in the country.
In the parliament. Probably the best debater in New Zealand. I've never been in a debate. I lose to my wife. I don't even know.
What do you mean debate?
How do you debate? What, you say something? I say something? Does the ball go in the hoop? What? Oh, pool. I've never played pool. And then today, Deborah Russell, the Minister of Revenue, turned up from their obviously Labour's deep dives into Luxon, a rough photocopy of the Christchurch Boys High yearbook showing the Southland Old Boys Debating Prize given to one CM Luxon. So he's playing possum. He's playing Floyd Patterson peekaboo. He's reeling in his prey.
Which way do I hold this? And then suddenly under the leg around
He was setting up to hustle Chippy at the debate. He was going to go after the first break. He was like, "Wow, you're really good at debating, Chris. I mean, do you want to maybe bet $10 on the next segment?"
And then he's going to go, how many? Do you know how many digits I can do pi? And then he's just going to knock it off to 600 places.
I love it. I love the idea of Luxon being a debate hustler, just sort of going around the country challenging the smartest trivia guy in a bar to a debate for $10, and But it's Muhammad Ali. It's rope-a-dope. It's
wow.
It's interesting though because when you listen to the way that he's talking about the foreign buyers fee /tax /levy, are we doing levies for that? Just
duty.
Fees.
Yeah,
duties.
look at the master at work. Look at him playing dumb. He's got everyone fooled.
But he keeps talking about those $2 million homes as luxury homes, like they're only going to be buying luxury homes. But if you live in Auckland, you will know that if you hop on Trade Me, there's so many 2-bedroom apartments that are for sale for over $2 million and they're not even that flash. So it feels like perhaps they're a little bit
Just as a reminder, Annabelle works in TV.
So maybe they're a little bit underbaked in terms of their lines as well, because you're relying on a lot of people to not know that actually $2 million does not go a very long way in the Auckland housing market.
Well, I mean, also there was on I think it was News Hub last night. They had someone from Queenstown talking about how the average house price in Queenstown is $1.7 million, and obviously that has a gravitational pull. If all the real estate agents and all the vendors find out that that it's a $2 million entry point for foreigners, it's like, well, the price of this property is $2 million, which has an effect on the rest of the market.
And I mean, I think with the foreign buyers ban, right, it seems clear that they just made a mistake somewhere. You know, that seems to be the inescapable conclusion.
I think
they made a mistake with their assumptions or their calculations.
The great challenge is to go out there and find an economist who can both speak approvingly of taking GST off fresh fruit and vegetable and endorse the calculations of the foreign buyer.
And you can tell, you know, they don't have an answer for it. You can see with the, the legality of the now foreign buyer's fee, since the tax wouldn't be permissible, they've retrofitted it and gone back and said, well, look, okay, actually, as we originally announced it, it probably wouldn't have flown, but look, or as we initially understood it, we didn't do the work on the tax treaties, but now we've talked to Robin Oliver and actually we can kind of pretzel-like kind of fit it in. They clearly haven't found a way to sort of go back and redo the calculations on the 740 million. And so they're just, well, we're just going to bash through. I expect that they probably didn't think it would still be live 2 weeks later, and you probably have to give credit to the media for really, sticking on that point. And they this is the thing, unless Luxon has, as my former colleague Matthew Hooden has been writing some very, very personally insulting columns about Luxon, and one of his burns is that his favourite genre of books is self-help books, and unless this is something that Luxon got from Sun Tzu's The Art of War for Business. He doesn't have a good answer for that, and I think that what they're probably going to have to do is, if the media don't let up on it, which I don't think they will, all signs point to no for that, is that they will. They need to kind of lose it in the fog of war of the Prefu and sort of go, well, actually, what's $500 million here and there, given that the Prefu is all fake, and
kind of take a hit on it in a way, without saying we were wrong. Kind of fudge it out to a way that because it's true, right? Like I mean, forecasts change, and in the end, $2 billion over 4 years, absolutely non-trivial, but also forecasts shift more than that over periods of time. Or
look, have a look at that TV3 poll. Read Research News Hub poll, which said more people disapproved of reopening foreign sales to foreign buyers, and say, "Oh, look, this is what the campaign's for: hearing from the electorate."
Actually, funnily enough,
and so we're going to back down from our highly effective and very doable tax policy.
Oh, they didn't think they'd back down from it. Funnily enough, that was a really interesting exercise in polls on the 6 p.m. Bulletins last night. Both had from their polls earlier in the week a question about the foreign buyers tax. Yeah. I think I have this right in saying One News, Verian said, "Do you think that there should be that they should be allowed to do it?" And people disapproved of it because the word tax wasn't used. The same question in the News Hub was asked, including the word should be with a taxed, and that reintroduced. I'm sorry, I'm phrasing this very badly, but the numbers were the other way around, like roughly 55-35. So it's not as simple as that. Like people are into it, and they no doubt had focus grouped or polled it, as long as there is a tax incoming, which is why, because this is the weird place we've been. When this was first introduced, it seemed like that's a smart way of doing it. They were under pressure in advance about whether or not they were going to reopen the door to foreigners buying New Zealand property, and it's like, ta-da! We've got it. We've found a revenue source from it. We've made it seem just like rich people, just like Peter Thiel's, so ordinary Kiwis aren't going to be affected, and since then it's just eroded all the way through.
I like the way you said Verian.
Is that right?
I don't know, is it Verian or Verian? I don't know, but the way you said it made it sound cool.
They should make it very on.
I said Prefu in an earlier podcast this week, and I got quite a lot of criticism for that from my colleagues.
Instead of saying Prefu.
Yeah, I think it is Prefu.
It's
pre-election, but then is it Bifu or Befu when it's the budget one? Because it's Haifu, Befu, Prefu. Anyway. I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Speaking of the pre-election fiscal update, does that shift the sands at all, Ben? Does that change the argument? It's been played a bit. It was played by Labour as not as bad as we expected, but it's really like saying we're getting kicked in the head, but we're not going to get kicked in the head as hard as we expected to get kicked in the head.
But not like full concussion.
Not like just absolutely smashed in the head. Just still kicked in the head.
Not like a full-on brain injury, just like quite headachy for a little while. The thing I find interesting about it is obviously Nationals coming in very strong, very critical, but do they have a little bit of a balancing act? Because if the outlook is as terrible as they're positioning it, that you would expect would then limit what they're able to do in terms of tax cuts and so on. So I wonder if they are potentially boxing themselves into a corner that they're then going to have to, defend with great difficulty.
I think that's the so-called the trap that Robertson was trying to set, right? The cupboard is bare. It's not just bare this year. It's bare for the next 10 years. Don't think you're promising anything, And when you talk about setting expectations, well, sure, it's better than we expected maybe 3 weeks ago when Grant Robertson Emergency announced that he was cutting $4 billion worth of government spending over the next 4 years. But it's significantly worse than the budget, which was presented less than 120 days ago. Yep. The operating deficit for this year alone has blown out by $3 billion from 4 months ago. There's an extra $6.9 billion of government spending. So basically, as Grant Robertson was rushing this off to the printing presses, promising that there was, the government's going to be living off 2-minute noodles and tap water for the next 10 years, he's just racking up the Uber Eats bills right to the last minute. It is, Nicola Willis and National have criticised this, and they're right to. Robertson has not once, as finance minister, met his own allowance for discretionary spending from the previous budget. He has exceeded it every time. And to then sort of say, the books are in okay shape as long as for the next decade we spend less than we have every previous year on new initiatives. I mean, it's fantasy land stuff. And so what I think the actual effect of the Prefu is that we kind of know Labour's lying when they say that they'll stick to it. We know that National won't be able to stick to it as set down without strict cuts. I think it just sort of de-anchors everything and sort of it just means we're sort of, it's all kind of imaginary now.
Well,
I think it has the opposite effect to what Labour intended. I think Labour intended it to be a straitjacket and keep everyone's promises completely confined. But I think just like a 1950s lunatic in a movie, it's allowed imaginations to take flight. And,
Yeah. I mean, it still does mean that everyone has to go away, David Seymour included has talked about this, go away and redo their fiscals, and put so I still think it's a net positive. And, that we have it, that it's there, that Ruth Richardson gave us the Prefu and the Prefu, that we can, then oblige the parties to go to their numbers. Annabelle, We talked a bit about New Zealand First, who are hovering over probably 5%, which we on this podcast have absolutely predicted all the way across the last 3 years that was likely. I don't think you need to go back and check anything to be assured of that.
I'm still ruling him out.
Whoa.
Same.
Whoa.
Ruling out a New Zealand First return. It's over.
What do you think, like 4.5? Is that where you're going?
They might even get as high as 4.9.
4.9.
All of their support so far as far as we can tell is coming from the left bloc. It's not coming off National or ACT, which is quite a surprise. And so it's not having the desired effect of keeping National or ACT out of government. So I think that all of the sort of the Labourites, the Green voters who have forsaken their principles to vote to indicate their support for a racist conspiracy party in order to try and
party that sometimes appeals to people with those
in order to try and prevent a National ACT government. I think that they will lose heart before the election and either not turn out.
What about the people who say, and we had a bit of this in reverse last time, and I accept that it wouldn't be a large number of people, but there could be a group of people who are Labour voters who see the prospect of a National ACT government, you know, arguably the most right-wing government since Ruth Richardson, and say, I'm going to vote New Zealand First to push them up as a handbrake.
I think they'll be discouraged if they don't see evidence of that happening. As far as I can remember, the New Zealand First, even over 5%, they've been over 5% in most of the polls at least once. But I think only in the Guardian poll have they held the balance of power, and maybe Roy Morgan in February or something. And I think if the people who are intending to vote for that reason see that pattern coming up to the election, I think they will just not bother voting or just go back to voting Labour, because I don't see how you could bring yourself to vote for New Zealand First if you're not going to achieve what you wanted and you're just going to put more sort of Shortland Streeters who believe in the woke mind virus and WHO conspiracies in Parliament.
What about 5.1% and then out on specials? That would be good, amazing, wouldn't it? I don't imagine New Zealand First to go on specials. Anyway, more to the point, in terms of the wider world of anthropology and so forth, Annabelle Lee Mather. In Nelson, the Right Honourable Winston Peters said, here's the rub if you're Māori, we're not indigenous. We come from Hawaii. That's quite
I think he said
news.
Hawaii-iki.
Hawaii-iki?
That's how it was spelled, yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, seems like quite a big news.
Yeah, surprising for someone who's the former Minister for Foreign Affairs that he doesn't know what indigeneity is. And I also think that it's telling, because I think it hints at his own confidence about New Zealand First getting back, because I don't think Winston Peters genuinely believes that Māori aren't Indigenous, but I think he's pulling every trick that he can to try and squeeze every drop of support out there for New Zealand First by making these sorts of outrageous statements. And people are quick to dismiss it and say, oh, it's just Winston being silly, doesn't mean anything, doesn't have any impact. But actually it does, because for years Māori have been having their indigeneity denied of them by people like Martin Dutroux and the ones who believe that, you know, ancient Vikings settled in the Waipoua
Blondies
forest and all of that. And it may not seem like it matters, but actually, you know, those are the same characters that rallied around Alan Titford, who, you know, for years made Te Roroa's life an absolute living misery. And actually, the government changed their policy around treaty settlements because of that specific case. So it actually is dangerous talk, and it has a very real impact on Māori. And it's amazing to me that someone like Shane Jones, who grew up with the benefits of speaking Māori in a community that rallied around him as a rangatahi and fundraised to send him off to Tipene, who had mentors like Māori Marsden and Maturata, you know, who got to go to Harvard and be a young Māori man at Harvard, who got to be the CEO, I think it was, of Te Ohu Kaimoana, hard-fought Māori rights, would stand for a party that denies our people our place as tangata whenua.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when I was a younger, stupid teen who, I think I played Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. And I would hear, the kind of Celtic New Zealand kind of conspiracies. And you think, oh, these are kind of, funny, mysterious sort of alternate histories of New Zealand. And it's only later, you realise they're actually connected to a very virulent strain of racist and, actually, I know the word's overused these days, but actually neo-Nazi sort of thought, which is to do with trying to undermine undermine indigenous claims with literal fantasies about some pre-European, pre-Māori races of red-haired giants who lived in New Zealand or Phoenicians who visited in their longboats or whatever. And, we see that Ngāi Tahu, when they were doing their claim, were bedeviled by this thing called Waitaha, which is, a hapu, and were a pre-Ngāi Tahu iwi who lived in South Island and became part of
who are Ngāi Tahu. Part of us.
Yeah, they became part of Ngāi Tahu. They all merged. But then they became
kidnapped
they were sort
by
of
Barry
hijacked,
Brailsford.
Hijacked by these sort of hippie kind of people who sort of talked up Waitaha as this kind of fairy race who talked to rocks and were different from Māori, and it's all inextricably linked with racist, like very obviously racist anti-Māori sentiment. And the fact that Winston, this isn't just an academic thing where he gets to show off his knowledge about Taiwan and the Great Migration. This is appealing to some of the worst elements in society, and it just shows how far down the rabbit hole he's willing to go to try and get back to 5%, and it's actually shameful.
Kia ora, Ben. Tēnā koe, iera kōrero, Ben. In all seriousness, though, I look at, Winston's statements this week. There he is, a senior politician, kaumātua. And then I look to, the Hannah Maipi Clarks and the Tamitha Pauls and the Chloes, and I think, roll on the next generation, because, if this is the quality of leadership that we're getting from some of our most senior political leaders, and man, I cannot wait for the next generation to roll through.
Kia ora, we're done. Back soon. Quick word, next Wednesday, September 20, we're going to do the world's longest ever podcast. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be lots of stuff. It's going to be exciting. We're going to just absolutely gorge on the joy of democracy and podcasting. Yeah, okay. So more soon on that.
This is Climate Adaptation.
We are the pōtiki of the taiao.
And the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirehama, the Kōpapa Korangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komata o Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spin-Off Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.